Chapter 5. As a general rule of thumb, I don't drive if I don't have to. To be fair, the spirit of this rule applied to everything in my post-Gertie life. I didn't leave the trailer unless I had to. I didn't work unless I had to. I didn't talk to people unless I had to. The reasons were the same across the board. The psychic pull that cranked my empathy all the way up to unbearable made driving on busy roads near impossible. Each passing car a whip snap of emotional torture that was as invasive as it was explosive. And if I was lubricated enough to dull the psychic crush of the pull, that just meant getting behind the wheel would be a world-class level of dumbassery. Most of the time, I took the bus. If I was working a job with Valdez, I rode shotgun. Since my gig with Beckett Miller wasn't until that evening, I found myself faced with one of the rare opportunities it was worth taking the truck out. Beckett had left me flush with cash, and Owens Manor was drier than a nun attending midnight mass in the presence of his holy popeness himself. Unless she gets off on that sort of thing. To each their own, I guess. Point is, I had more than enough time to blink off the cheap beer and antiseptic mouthwash so I could drive like hell a few miles to Murph's. That's how I ended up sitting in the far corner of the parking lot outside Murph's Liquor. His small shop was located at the end of a strip mall anchored by a low-rent supermarket situated at the opposite end of the building. Murph's sat between a seedy adult video store and a large plot of undeveloped land. The video store didn't open until late afternoon, and the empty plot of land was just that, empty. If I wasn't already sporting a dangerously high, pull-numbing blood alcohol level, Murph's was the safest liquor store in the city to restock my booze supply. It was still morning, and there weren't any other cars on my side of the parking lot. I had backed my truck in and was keeping a careful eye on Murph's storefront. After a few minutes, I was pretty sure there was just a single customer inside. As I waited for my path to clear, my thoughts turned back to the strategy for the day. Step 1 was simple enough, despite all the necessary guardrails to protect against the pull. Acquire booze. Step 2 involved minding that first general rule of thumb and dump the truck back at Owens Manor. This would likely be the best part of my day since I plan to lean heavily into the results of Step 1 and thoroughly drown my super empathy before hopping on a bus to see Josephine. Step 3 was all Joe. Since she allegedly sent the Beckett Miller twat in the first place, I needed to hear confirmation of his story right from the horse's mouth. If everything checked out, I'd then see what my favorite reference librarian could tell me about the city of St. Charles's growing Nazi problem. Step 4, lunch. Preferably large, greasy, and drowned in booze. I'm not sure what Step 5 would be, but it would probably involve more booze. Step 6 was easy. Meet Beckett Miller at the rally, and punch a Nazi. Step 7, collect the rest of the money from Beckett Miller before returning to the manor. Step 8 involved the complex process of drinking even more booze and enjoying a victory cigar to celebrate not having to work another gig again for several months. As I sat there alone in my truck, I smiled. It was a good fucking plan. The lady inside the liquor store finally made her way to the register and paid for her booze. She exited the store and got into a car parked in the front row. About fucking time. I climbed out the cab of my truck as she started to drive off, grabbing my army jacket from the passenger seat and pulling it on. Fuck. The lady was driving up my lane to exit the parking lot. I shuffled around the backside of the truck as she passed by. The pull snapped sharply. The invisible piano wire pulled taut between the lady's head and my chest. With the lady's close proximity and the growing lack of a proper alcoholic dam, the pull yanked powerful vibrations down the invisible wire. I felt a strong, uncomfortable tug deep in my chest, and a second later, my brain flooded with something smooth and warm. I grabbed the edge of the cargo bed to brace myself. She was excited. But really excited. A familiar, tingling arousal spread through my groin, and I felt the telltale signs of an unwanted erection. This lady was horny as fuck. She was planning for a long sex weekend because... Oh, wow. Okay. Her husband was out of town, and she was already soaking in anticipation for one extremely hard and throbbing. The connective psychic wire snapped as the car pulled away, and I gasped in relief. I rubbed my mouth as I straightened, scanning the parking lot to make sure there would be no other unexpected encounters. The coast was clear. I quickly hoofed it to Murph's front door, while trying desperately to forget that the last time I had properly gotten my dick wet was before Gertie had her first migraine. It was during one of those marathon sex weekends that my new friend eagerly anticipated. One of those days you just committed to staying in bed and doing what needed to be done, over and over and over again? Yeah, it's been a while. I pushed through the door and Murph glanced up from behind the register. His face was hidden behind a week of dark scruff, but his eyes were wide and bright, if not strangely distant. Murph wore a dark cardigan and had a general way about him that made me think he was constantly wading through a pool of molasses. I could feel the immediate tension of the piano wire. This time, though, there weren't any of those pulses that vibrated into my chest, rattling my bones and setting off a cacophony of unwanted emotions inside my head. Bushy eyebrows went up, and a slow smile crept across Murph's lips. "Mr. Owens," he said, words rolling out gently like Grandma hefting a bowling ball down the lane. "Been a bit." He shuffled around the counter as I grabbed one of the tiny liquor store shopping carts. He casually patted me on the shoulder as he passed, throwing the lock on the door and flipping the open sign to closed so I could shop in peace. We've danced this routine once or twice before. Despite his closeness, despite the unsettling physical contact, I still wasn't picking up any vibrations from Murph. Putting aside the liquor shop's location and proximity to other stores, this was the main reason for coming to Murph's. The pull was there, but it was as if something was inhibiting the emotions on the other end. I didn't know much about Murph, but I did know he fought in one of those pointless wars, took a bullet in the head, and miraculously survived. Suffice it to say, Murph must have had something scrambled upstairs. Either that, or Murph Wilkins was just one massively chill motherfucker. Whatever it was, I was just grateful for the friendly, if not a little odd, purveyor of liquor. "I heard about Dockside," Murph mentioned as he eased his way behind the register. I hesitated before starting down the aisle. Admittedly, that night at the bar wasn't my finest hour. "Word around the block is that big ol' Abraham Owens is just this side of Breaking Bad," Murph mused slowly. "Who says I haven't already?" I asked. Murph chuckled, but even that overt expression wasn't sending any vibrations down the wire. "Been my experience that the line between good and bad tends to get so fuzzy sometimes even the good guys don't know where they stand." I grunted. Standing for something is a quick way to get yourself knocked down. I go where the money is, plain and simple. "Well, no," Murph replied with a slow shrug. "You seem to be anything but." Murph tended to have a way with words, and that way tended to be confusing, and it wasn't like that otherwise overactive sixth sense was being any help. Murph nodded, registering my confusion. "Plain and simple, Mr. Owens," he explained. "You are anything but. Okay, how about this? I won't make any assumptions as to whether or not you're a bad guy, as long as you don't, either." Fair enough," I muttered, turning back down the aisle. "You take your time, Abe. I'll be here when you're ready." I grabbed the first bottle of whiskey at the same time my phone started buzzing. Valdez was calling again. I tossed a glance back to the register to confirm that Murph was behind the counter and the door was locked. The only place better to talk to Valdez was back at the manor, but I had already postponed this chat for too long. I guess it's nice knowing there's at least one person out there worrying about you. I was about to flip the phone open when glass shattered violently from behind me. Even as I spun around, I realized I hadn't felt anybody approach. "Empty the fucking register!"